Ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this Budget and Finance Committee meeting for October 7th, 2013. I'm Paul Krikorian, Chair of the committee, and I'm joined by my colleagues, Councilmember Paul Koretz and Councilmember Bob Blumenfield, and we're ready to begin. If anybody would like to offer public comment about general public comment about anything within the jurisdiction of this committee or about a specific agenda item, please fill out one of these cards and bring it forward. Right now I only have one such card, but if anybody's in the process of filling one out, just go ahead and bring it up whenever you're ready. Members, I'd like to propose items 3, 4, 5, and 6 as consent candidates. Unless either of you have any concerns or questions about those items, we can dispose of those. They're all routine matters. Or appear to be so to me, at least. And if there's no objection, it will be the action of the committee to approve those reports. That brings us then to closed session items. So is there anyone here who would like to offer public comment on closed session items number 1 or number 2? Seeing none and having received no cards, comment is closed on those matters, and we'll retire to closed session in the other room. So if you're here on those matters, you can come. If you're not, we'll be back shortly. From Christopher Sutton, so I'd like to ask Mr. Sutton to come forward.
Item number 7 is a motion, Huizar Fuentes, relative to instructing various departments to identify business retention best practices and make recommendations as to the provision of incentives or other measures to assure the retention of businesses, tenants, and employees subject to displacement as a consequence of city infrastructure improvements and facility development projects, i.e. 6th Street Viaduct project. This was heard at the Economic Development Committee, on September the 10th.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Sutton, welcome.
My name is Christopher Sutton. I'm an attorney for the Westin Bonaventure Hotel. We support the motion as far as it goes, though this Friday the Council will be considering a Huizar Bonin motion related to its instructions to staff on its negotiations on the mangrove property in Little Tokyo and whether the sale and lease of that property will go to the MTA under simply economic terms. We are asking Councilmember Bonin and Huizar, whose motion is this Friday, to amend it to instruct city staff to seek contract terms with the MTA that will alleviate the environmental harms that we believe will occur as a result of the regional connector subway, specifically the construction and removal of Flower Street for a 3-block stretch between 4th and the 7th Metro Station. The city has the ability to urge and contract with MTA to insist that they tunnel to the maximum extent possible and do not remove Flower Street in front of the Bonaventure Hotel and in front of the Paul Hastings Tower, the City National Tower. Everybody we've talked to said this is economically possible, it is technologically and engineering-wise possible. This motion identifies the city's infrastructure impacts on businesses and how those can be mitigated. The city is in a position at the moment to insist that the MTA modify the design of the regional connector project so that it does not impact the adjoining businesses. The MTA has already modified the Crenshaw Line project to provide for possible business mitigation losses along the Crenshaw Line. That motion was insisted upon by Supervisor Ridley Thomas. We believe that such a potential business loss compensation by MTA would be helpful in gaining public support for a lot of these projects. There's currently litigation on all 3, the Crenshaw Line, the regional connector where we're suing the MTA, and the West Side Line where Beverly Hills and the school district are suing. To the extent that the city will take action, as we've requested on Friday, in an unrelated motion, which is the Bonin Huizar motion this Friday, we hope that the city will support the Bonaventure and will also impact businesses in Little Tokyo and entirely along the route. So we support the current motion, and we wish that there was more that could be said about the infrastructure projects of other organizations. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. All right. Do we have a report on item number 7? Or I guess not, because it's only to request the report. So if there's no questions or comments on item number 7, it'll be the action of the committee to approve the recommendations of the Economic Development Committee and request the staff reports on business incentives. That brings us to item number 8.
Item number 8 is the City Administrative Officer and City Attorney reports and a draft ordinance relative to the proposed amendments to the Los Angeles Administrative Code and a proposed agreement with Anschutz Entertainment Group, AEG, for the management and operations of the Los Angeles Convention Center. This item was also referred to the Economic Development Committee.
So far, I have one card on item number 8. That's from David Henderson. Mr. Henderson, if you'd like to come forward. Anybody else who'd like to offer public comment, please fill out a card and bring it forward before Mr. Henderson is done. Welcome.
Good afternoon, council members. David Henderson with District Council 36, International Union of Painters and Allied Trades. Specifically, I come from the trade show side of the industry. Just here to simply say that we're still in favor of moving forward with AEG and the operation of the facility.
Okay. Thank you very much. All right. Mr. Santana. And Mr. Overham, welcome.
Good afternoon. This item is the final step in a 2-year effort to strengthen the convention center and to maximize it as an asset for the city. What you have before you follows direction that was given by your committee and by council back in June to proceed forward with negotiations with AEG for the management of the convention center. We've established a draft agreement after a series of intensive negotiations with my office, AEG, and the convention center, as well as the city attorney. The city attorney has an opportunity to weigh in every aspect of this agreement, and it reflects their recommendations. Before you are 4 different major substantive issues. The first is the agreement with AEG. Regarding the management and operation services of the convention center. A draft ordinance changing and strengthening the governance structure and a recommendation to amend the conflict of interest code to reflect changes in departmental staff and authorization to my office and the city attorney to make non-substantive changes to the agreement, sort of minor tweaks here and there before we finalize it. This agreement is a 5-year agreement. The term allows for 3 years of unfettered ability to terminate. It creates a compensation structure of 175 base and additional $350,000 based on performance and ability to meet revenue targets that will be established on an ongoing basis. It includes other elements, including a business and marketing development fund to attract more citywide conventions, funds for working capital that will be tapped into only as needed basis, and a corporate guarantee for performance bond. Every year, the department will continue to submit a budget. The department would be reduced down to about 13 members. They'll have 3 responsibilities. One is to manage this contract. The second is to manage the contract with the LA Tourism and Convention Bureau, which is currently in my office. And the third is to work with the governing board to establish a citywide tourism strategy, including strengthening the number of hotels that we have in the city. This agreement was established, again, in coordination with the city attorneys to abide by all conflict of interest issues. The way it's structured is that any area in which there's a potential for conflict will be decided and acted on exclusively by the general manager and the governing board. And there's a firewall that's been created to ensure that no conflict of issues surface. Regarding our employees, we have currently about 89 full-time employees and 35 half-time employees at the convention center. We've been successful in finding placement for half of those employees, and we are committed to continue finding placement for the remaining. The employees are being transitioned into departments that have vacant budgeted positions. No new positions are being established for the transition of these employees. These are positions that would have had been filled by folks from outside of the city, and so we're using managed hiring as a way of ensuring that we find proper placement. We have also offered, AG has also had an opportunity to meet and interview every employee that's interested in working with AG. They have made offers to virtually everyone who was interested, and 5 have accepted. We expect that once the council finalizes agreement, that more employees will likely want to transition over to AG. But regardless of those employees who choose to stay, we have a commitment to find a placement for them. Should you approve this agreement, it would be a transition that would take the remainder of the calendar year. We're trying to make it as seamless for the vendors and the users of the convention center as possible to ensure that their experience continues to be a good one during this period of time. AAG and the department have committed to live within the existing budget, and we will monitor that closely through every FSR like we do with any other department. The timeline is that we're hoping that the contract could be executed this month. We will be placing employees over the next several weeks as AG's responsibility continues to expand, and then in no later than January will the agreement be in full effect, meaning that AG will have full authorization. With that, I'll turn it over to Bud if there's anything more you'd like to add.
No, I can answer any questions the committee members might have. I totally support everything that Mr. Santana said. I really believe that this is the right thing to do for the convention center and for the role of tourism and hospitality in Los Angeles. I really think this is a bold new direction for the city. I really think it's the right thing to do. There will be bumps along the way. Got to tell you that. You don't make a transition like that and not have some bumps along the way. But I can guarantee you that we are absolutely committed to see those bumps through and get them worked out and make sure this works.
Let me just close by thanking my staff, Rob and Natalie and Deanna, who've worked tirelessly to get us to this point. I also want to thank the CLA's office, John Wickham, who participated with us in negotiating, and of course the city attorney's office and our consultants.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the report. We'll start with Mr. Kretz.
A couple things. On the placement of city employees, I know we have a commitment. Is this an ironclad commitment? I mean, no matter what, these employees will get placed, right?
We have an agreement with the coalition to ensure that in the event of any privatization efforts, that all employees that are impacted are given an opportunity for a placement somewhere else in the city family.
And I would add that's for full-time employees and permanent
Part-time.
part-time employees. It's as rock solid a commitment as I've ever seen in this business.
Okay, that's good. My only concern about this whole process is that there were reforms that were suggested that had nothing to do with privatizing that could have been implemented first, and then we could have seen how successful that was and whether that got us to where we were hoping to be without having to take the step of privatizing. Why didn't we implement those changes in structure first, so we could, if nothing else, so we could tell how much the privatizing actually accomplished and how much the structural changes that we're going to make at the same time accomplished?
We have. The most immediate change was the change in the booking policy, and that change allowed a more flexible convention center so that there are more opportunities for citywide conventions, and so it gives us staff to work with the Bureau to market and to actually find slots within the calendar for citywide conventions. And so that change happened immediately, and if you talk to the head of the Bureau, he will say that it's a major step forward in being able to market the convention center. That was probably one of the most important changes that you could support, is to allow greater flexibility. So that has been done, and we're already seeing the benefits of that. The second piece was to strengthen the role of the commission itself. Currently, there's an advisory commission, and they're strictly advisory. And if you look at most successful convention centers in the country, they have a governing board that has decision-making authority, has direct oversight, that works closely with the mayor, works closely with the executive director, and aggressively recruits citywide conventions. The ordinance to do so the city attorney has been working on, and that's ready to go. We are making some minor modifications, which is part of the action before you. The mayor is currently considering appointments to be made to that commission. And so within the context of other commissions' appointments, we anticipate that the mayor will be doing so. And I've had several conversations with the mayor and his staff about the kind of individuals we want, individuals who understand the hospitality business, the tourism industry, who will be cheerleaders for the city of LA and help develop a citywide tourism plan and work with the rest of the city family in establishing strategies to build a number of hotel spaces around the convention center and citywide. So that's been working in tandem of all of this. The other piece, of course, relates to creating contiguous space, which is obviously an important part of why the city is on record supporting our partnership with AEG for a stadium. We had a 2-year agreement with AEG. The ball's in their court to find a football team. You probably know as well as I do how difficult of a task that is, and they're working on that. But if that moves forward, then we're hopeful that at the end of that agreement, the city will have a much more effective convention center in terms of use of space, because it'll be contiguous, as well as a state-of-the-art stadium, not paid for by taxpayer dollars. So we've been moving aggressively, but again, starting with the most important piece being the change of the booking policy. You want to add anything to that, Bud?
No, I agree with all of that. I think all of these pieces are important, and the hotel piece is very important. The expansion of the convention center piece is very important. It really takes all of those working together, whether we did it 2 years ago or whether we do it now. We didn't do it 2 years ago. We've got to do it now.
Well, I'm glad to hear we've implemented some of the things that I think we all thought needed to be implemented. The only question is, will those be implemented for a long enough period of time before the privatization kicks in that we'll know how much of the greater success of the convention center is due to those changes, and how much of it will be to having an outside contract for management?
Again, it's when we first proposed sort of a major shift in the convention center, we proposed it as a multi-tier strategy. So at the end of the day, it's hard to tell which piece resulted in which outcome. But I think that all of these pieces work together. You can't recruit a citywide convention if all the slots are taken because of a more narrow booking policy. So opening up the calendar was a big part of just letting us be able to be more effective in recruiting. You can't bring in new customers. I mean, this is a business that's highly competitive, and word of mouth matters if you don't have outstanding customer service when you arrive, and with the kind of experience that the people who attend conventions experience throughout the city, or throughout the country rather. And so maintaining customer service at an outstanding level is a critical component. And then of course the contiguous space is important, because there are certain conventions that are who require that kind of space, who we're simply not even in the running for because we don't offer it to them. So, it's all, and at the end of the day, if you don't have a hotel to sleep in, then you could attract the best convention in the world, but if you don't have the space to house them. So all of these things have to work in tandem, and so that's why this wasn't strictly about privatizing the convention center. And we wanted to take a much broader approach to look at all of the underlying issues to make this the best asset for the city.
If I could add to that, you're going to see increase in citywide conventions immediately. That is going to happen. I think, I don't have the numbers in front of me. We'll get you those numbers. I think we had 23 or 24 citywides last year. We're hoping to have 30, 31 next year. So you're going to see tangible results of that immediately.
And that's before the privatization piece kicks in?
No, this is change of the booking policy. I'm sorry, because of the booking policy. Is an example of one of the things that increased business. The article in the LA Times today you probably saw about San Diego fighting about Comic-Con versus the stadium. Should they have a bigger convention center and be able to handle events like Comic-Con, or should they take that land and do it for the football stadium and put an expansion of the convention center in a non-contiguous location 2 blocks away? We are in the ideal position of being able to do both. We can do an expansion of the convention center, and we can do another expansion of the convention center or a football stadium. So anything they can do, we can do better. And that's going to come. So I think you're going to see short-term benefits from changes like the booking policy. I'm positive you're going to see long-term benefits by the expansion of the contiguous convention center and by the addition of hotel rooms. We're very committed to building 4,000, not building, committed to promoting the construction of 4,000 hotel rooms in that immediate area. Chicken and the egg. The conventions want to see the hotels. The hotels don't want to go until they see the convention. So we've got to work both sides of that equation. But it all will come together.
So where does the privatization come in? Because it sounds like all of those things could have been done without taking that step.
The privatization comes in is because we're able to do more with less. I'll give you a simple example of within the existing budget that we have today, AAG will be providing full security for the convention center, and that security would be contiguous to what's happening on the broader campus at LA Live. Will be a more enhanced. We will be investing in ways that we can't now do our financial challenges in marketing the convention center more effectively. We'll be able to include additional staff support, and bring in sort of the latest techniques in hospitality, of which AAG has specialized, given that it's their core business. And so the simplest outcome is simply having a more effective experience at the convention center without having to invest additional dollars for it. And so while that occurs, then as more and more citywide conventions arrive to the city, then the growth in revenue you won't see at the convention center, but you'll see in other areas, in our sales tax and our hotel tax and other areas, which is part of the ripple effect that we want to see. So it's we should be able to start seeing the difference in the short term in terms of how the convention center is, how the services are being delivered at the facility itself, but also be able to see it in our revenue projections as we see both revenue increase at the convention center and on a citywide basis.
I guess I keep popping in to support that thing. Just in terms as a manager, you can just see inherent efficiencies. That right now they have a parking company on one side of the street. We have a parking operation on this side of the street. You can coordinate those two parking operations and run them with a single overhead and spread it out. We have our security on our side of the street. They have their security on their side of the street. You can merge those activities and get better security by using their security company combined with the security they provide on our side of the street. They have a food services company on one side of the street. We have a different food services company on the other side of the street. There are just tons and tons of areas where their efficiencies are going to result from the two of us working together rather than as separate neighbors.
Thank you.
Mr. Blumenfield?
Oh, I'm sorry. Didn't want to step on Mr. Kratz if you had another. Okay. You mentioned the commission is going to be strengthened, and that seems a little counterintuitive given that we're, the booking policy is now going to be more in private hands. So how does that help me reconcile that?
The booking policy is actually not going to be in private hands. What at the end of the day, this is still the city's asset, and the decisions on booking the convention center, particularly for conventions, will ultimately be made by the department. There's a tension that exists at the convention center between short-term trade shows and other activities that bring people from the San Gabriel Valley or from Long Beach or from other parts of the region, have them drive into the convention center. If we're lucky, they buy gas and maybe grab a sandwich, and then they go back home. Those help keep the lights on. So, people go through a naturalization ceremony or through a flower show or whatever it is. The department has placed a lot of focus on those because of our financial situation. What we're trying to do is create a balance between those kind of trade shows and citywide conventions that bring people from outside of the city to stay at our hotel, spend money, visit, all of our amenities. And so that balance still needs to be reconciled by the department. And so to assist the general manager, we're bringing in an oversight committee whose job will be to establish a citywide strategy around how do you increase the number of citywide conventions while still having enough revenue to keep the lights on. And so AAG's role is to implement what it is that those decisions are. So the booking of the convention center as a venue, all of the days of the years will be ultimately decided by, as they are now, by the department under the advice of a oversight committee. If you look at the most successful convention centers around the country, which we have, San Francisco, Chicago, and others, they have an authority in their cases whose job it is to establish goals every year, strategies to meet those goals, and then work those respective contracts, the private contract for the operations, the Convention Center Bureau, to hit those targets. And so the goal is to strengthen that governing structure so that they're better equipped and more aggressive in setting that policy and management.
And what's AEG's role in that?
AEG's role is to actually implement and to provide the services within the convention center. So the decision making will be in the hands of Bud and his team at the direction of a governing board based on a larger citywide strategy that will be developed. The day-to-day operations, the people moving the chairs, coordinating the food service, providing the experience that the visitor will see, will be AEG. So we're contracting out the operations part of it. The decision-making stays within the hands of the department.
But the marketing and all of that?
Well, there depends on what kind of marketing it is. So if it's a citywide convention, then the Bureau is responsible for that. They receive a percentage of our hotel tax. They they book the hotel rooms. They coordinate, interface with, whatever citywide convention there is. They work with the department to book it, and then there'll be the day-to-day operations. The actual experience itself will be provided by AG. So the center of it is still the department and the governing board, whose job it is to reconcile all of these moving parts under the context of a broader strategy for the city.
I know your time's jumping. Go ahead.
I can't help but jump in. So if you look at it from an org chart point of view, the department becomes basically a contract manager. One of the contracts we have is with LA Tourism. They do the marketing for 12 months and out, 12 months, 24, 36 months. A lot of these conventions book 2, 3, 5 years in advance. So one arm is the booking with them for 24 months out. The other contract we manage is with AEG. They do the day-to-day operations. They set up the tables, put in the chairs, make sure the PA system's working, and they book the space for 12 months and below. And then they both report to us as the department with a commission. In the past, the LA Tourism contract reported to the CAO, and there was no working relationship in that sense between LACC and LATCB. Now there will be with this new executive director position and with the new commission.
And one other, you mentioned that the 5 employees are going to AEG. It's 5 out of a total of, 124 or something?
Well, the number's gone down to about 89 full-time employees, and because as the city's been taking steps in this regard, employees have been moving to other departments as opportunities surface. AG has made offers to any employee who was interested in coming in. 5 have accepted. We anticipate that should your council approve this contract, then more may be likely to transition. Regardless of that, 40 employees have already identified departments within the city that they're going to be moving into. So Rec and Parks, for example, has a number of positions they've committed to fill in positions that are vacant and budgeted that they expect to fill regardless of what happens with this contract. They were recruiting folks from the outside. We worked with them and urged them that before they bring another person to the city family that they should interview and identify candidates within the convention center to hire first, and they've offered positions to several of them. So we're now down to about 40 employees, and over the next 3 or 4 months, we will continue to match vacant budgeted positions to the skill set of those employees. And so we think things are going to move very rapidly. We're already starting to see that happen now. Now, keep in mind that should your council approve this contract, it's going to take the rest of this calendar year to fully transition from the day-to-day operations being exclusively city to being AG. So, we can't have everybody leave tomorrow. We have a major show, the auto show, coming up around Thanksgiving. They're very supportive here. There's a representative here who can speak in support of what we're doing. We have to make sure that it's a seamless transition. So it's going to happen gradual over the next few months to ensure that all city employees find a slot, and we'll help facilitate that as we have, and at the same time increase the capacity of AAG.
Was there any requirement that the offers that are being made to the employees be, the same or greater in terms of pay and benefits?
They have to be comparable, yes.
Well, they have to be comparable work. They don't have to be comparable pay. And
that's a big distinction.
That's a big distinction. The truth is, in terms of sales jobs, setup jobs, the city employees probably get paid more than the comparable positions. AEG's obligation is to pay our people equivalent to what they would pay their people. So they have a pay structure. Just like we have a classification and a pay plan, they have a classification and pay plan. They can't treat our people less than that.
So that explains why only 5 have taken that route, because they may be comparable positions, but the comparable compensation is not there.
But for those employees that choose to stay in the city, then we're committed to find them comparable work and pay. So there's no displacement in
But that explains why the folks are choosing. I was trying to understand why only 5 out of the big number, whether it was started at 124 down to 89, now down to 40 something. Why why very few are going over to AEG and I think
comparable pay if you stay with the city.
No, well, it's not just the pay, but it's also the benefits. And your pension. If you've been at the city for 15 years, you've made an investment in our pension system, and so people may want to continue to be in the city family to ensure that they receive the pension that they've been paying for. So early on when we first proposed this, we knew that there would be some that would be interested, but we anticipated that by far the majority would still choose to stay within the city family.
It's not a surprise
No.
to you. I mean, it was surprising to me to hear it, but now that I understand it, it's not surprising. And going into it, whenever people thought about this decision, just prior to my time being here, they understood that.
Right, and they also are, AG, and certainly a representative could speak on this issue, has also reached out to the intermittent as-needed employees, as you directed, to ensure that they are prepared and they've established a relationship with that workforce. These are not full-time or part-time employees. These are as-needed employees that are called in as needed basis. The council had directed that AG reach out to those workers, and which they have, and so they will so that they have an assessment of who they are, their skill set, and are prepared to hire them on an as-needed basis when the contract gets transitioned over.
I actually was a little bit surprised about the small number. I had expected that it would be more, even with different compensation packages and so forth. But I'm certainly pleased that we're protecting the seniority and the pension vesting rights and the continuity of employment for all of these employees. But I'm actually a little bit concerned about how that transition will affect the operation of the convention center too, when all of the employees who know the building are virtually all are going someplace else, and we're bringing a bunch of new folks in. How is that transition going to be managed, especially, Mr. Overham, when you've talked about the increase in the number of citywide conventions? That increase that we've gotten has been with people who've been talking on the phone with folks who are no longer going to be there. So how are we going to manage that transition in a way that's not going to cause drop-off on that increase in citywide conventions?
And our commitment to you is to do everything humanly possible to make sure there's not a drop-off. We have the AEG representatives here today. Brad Gesmer, who is going to be the day-to-day general manager of the convention center, came to us from the San Diego Convention Center. It's always good to take the top guy from your competition and put him on your team, and we're happy to do that. AEG is an excellent operator. I mean, they just run good facilities. They run good facilities here. They run good facilities all around the world. But the burden's going to be on them. That's right. Out of let's say we started a year ago with 120 employees, 5 of them go to AEG, maybe more by the time it comes out. But there will be a big transition. We will work closely with them. We will still have our core people here, and frankly, where some of these employees are going, some of the employees are going to airports, some of the employees are going to DWP, and we've worked with those general managers saying, hey, we might have to call upon those people from time to time to help on this. So one way or the other, it's our job to figure it out and to make sure it works well. AEG is very, very committed to work with us to make sure there is no drop-off in service. That people like the auto show coming now or a convention next year, they should not see a difference.
And can you talk a little bit about the organizational structure with the staff that you will have, which I think they're mostly in a contract administration and auditing capacity, I would expect. But talk about what those positions are and how they would oversee the day-to-day operations, what safeguards would be in place with regard to AEG's management of the revenues that come in and that sort of thing.
On the very last page of your report is an org chart. And again, I'm an old bureaucrat, so I always have an org chart. But there's an org chart, and we will be basically in 2 operations. We'll have Tom Fields, who is here, who will be chief operating officer in that sense. That we are still the landlords of the building.
I don't think that is in our report.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I don't have.
Do you have copies of the report?
It should be the last page of your report, but I'm going to give you mine. Let me just walk this up.
Might have been a photocopying error because it looks like it was on the back page, so sorry about that.
Here's the next color.
But the color one is different than the black and white one.
I did good. I got a photocopy on mine.
It's not just the colors, it's
That's interesting.
So, but I can explain it because I only have to use 2 fists. So we will have.
Okay, so first of all, we have 2 different ones.
Well, that one it was the original staff report that was originally went to you. This is a little
okay.
bit more refined. The one I gave you,
I have
Councilmember.
the old one.
No, the one I gave you, Councilmember, is correct.
Okay.
But again, I can explain this. Maybe I confused it by passing that out. I thought that'd be helpful. We are basically a contract administration department. One of the things that we will administer is AEG's contract to be the operator of the building. We, the city, are still the landlord of the building. Somebody falls down the escalator, we're going to get sued. Somebody gets mugged in the parking structure, we're going to get named in the lawsuit. We are still the landlord of the building. We still have to make sure that our operator is operating the building in a way that we think is safe and responsible. So we will have that landlord supervisory responsibility. We'll have two people, that will be responsible for that. In terms of the bigger part of the job is the contract administration. That we have the LA tourism contract, which is about $24 million a year, and we have the LA Convention Center, the AEG contract, that let's say is $25 million a year. So those two contracts have to be managed. They'll each be providing monthly reports. We'll have to review those monthly reports. I know the day is going to come when the auditor knocks on my door and wants to review that. I know the day is going to come when you knock on my door and want to review that. We just can't take those reports and stick them in a file cabinet someplace. We're going to have to audit those reports, and we're going to have to make sure what's the bang for the buck. What is it that we're getting from AEG for $25 million? What is it that we're getting from LATCB for $24 million a year? So, and we'll have a couple more people in that role. We'll have some accountants and some management assistance types to do that kind of contract management. Again, I've managed a lot of things over the years. Contract management's a tough gig because when you're supervising your own employees, they're your own employees.
Right.
When you're supervising a contract, you've got to be keeping track of them remote controlled. And so we take contract management very seriously.
And then Tom.
He's the landlord of making sure that they operate the building the way we would operate the building.
Yeah, and so what role will, I imagine that if there are liabilities, there's always going to be the question of, was it because of a defect in the property for which we would be responsible, or something to do with the day-to-day operation for which presumably AEG is responsible and will defend and indemnify the city? I'm assuming, is that right?
I'm not going to speak for the attorneys.
Well, no, I mean, is there a provision in the contract providing that liability arising out of the day-to-day management will be assumed by AEG?
Good afternoon, council members. Noreen Vincent from the City Attorney's Office. And yes, there is provision in the contract that they will indemnify us, hold us harmless, and we also require that they have insurance so that the indemnification can be supported.
Okay. They should be good for it with or without
They
insurance, I think.
definitely should be good
but
for
anyway,
it.
that's
So,
good to hear.
yes.
But how is the risk allocation in the defense and indemnification? Is it for any negligence on the part of AEG? Or?
Yeah, I believe it's except for the act of negligence or willful misconduct of the city that they're responsible. It's our standard indemnification language that was in the RFP and that we include in all of our contracts.
Okay. Very good. Thank you. Mr. Kretz.
A couple of things. I wonder if there's some way to have this referred to personnel to take a closer look at what our employees are being offered by AEG, et cetera, and dig a little deeper into it than we would necessarily do here.
Would you recommend the entire item, or that we report back on a regular basis on the status of the placement of the employees as a separate item?
I was actually going to ask for a regular report back on a number of things, but I think if we can, perhaps we can do it on two tracks. While we're moving forward towards council, a report to the PAW committee, a separate report to the PAW committee on the personnel impacts, on the state of transition of all the employees, whatever else you think would be of concern. I think it makes sense to do it that way.
And I don't know if you have the ability to tell us what AEG is offering to pay the same folks, but that would also be of interest to see what they're being offered.
So we'll be happy to report on a as often as you like to the PAW committee on the status of the impact of this contract to those employees who choose to stay in the city family and those who end up choosing to move on to AAG. So that could be a regular report back to your committee.
Okay, and just for the record, as I'm sure you're aware, previously I objected to this previously about the fact that I believe the privatization was premature and that we should have taken the other steps first and seen whether it was necessary. So I'm going to vote no on this item, but it's no reflection on AEG or their selection. I think it was a perfectly good choice. I just thought that step was premature and that I'm not sure that the privatization was necessary.
So I'm going to hop around here a little bit. A particular issue that has been, it's a small issue, but it's been of concern for a number of years for the film and television industry is that the convention center has been one of the single most difficult places in Los Angeles to film, and partly because of craft services limitations, that there are limitations on their ability to bring in their own food services for their crews and so on. Now that we're moving into a different management regime, one of the things I will be looking for is greater flexibility by AEG and the new management team with regard to encouraging more filming at the convention center by greater flexibility with regard to craft services.
So I'm being, Patty's whispering in my ear that the contract allows for, in cases of filming particularly, the craft to bring in their own food.
Terrific. That's great.
And let me just say, because I think John Wickham's here, and he was very, very protective of the filming industry. That was one of the things that we itemized with AEG, is that this is the home of Hollywood, and we need to make sure that the entertainment industry was protected during this transition.
Great. There's $500,000 in startup costs indicated in the report. I think, what does that relate to?
It's not, we're not expecting to have to dip into it, but part of the original proposal that AAG had provided was committee money put aside for any capital infrastructure needs. It's hard to identify what those needs may be in the first year, and even if we do identify, to fully implement them because we'll be halfway through the year by the time they're 100% responsible. So instead of identifying a different source of funding, we thought that we would allow that revenue source to be sort of working capital if we need it for any transition costs that are necessary. And so we won't know what they are until we confront them. We can't see anything today that we may necessarily need, but it's shifting what was already in their proposal for a different purpose. Ultimately, if it's not needed for transition, then obviously we will want to continue to use it for some kind of capital within the convention center itself to make it more effective and attractive.
Okay. So part of the compensation package for AAG includes some incentive fees. There's a earned incentive fee and a discretionary incentive fee. What's the difference? How is that going to, particularly with regard to the discretionary one, how is that going to be determined and by whom?
So the first, to start off, if AAG does not meet their revenue targets, and they will be established every year, it will be part of the budget process when the department submits their budget. The department will present their budget like every other department. If the revenue targets aren't hit, then they're ineligible for the incentive fee at all. So you need to hit your targets in order to qualify. And so a portion of that is the earned incentive fee is based on how successful they are in exceeding those revenue targets. And so those goals will be established on an annual basis. So they'll be based on percentage of growth beyond what was budgeted. And so the department and the commission would establish those goals, and then either they met them or they didn't. It'll be fairly straightforward.
And I assume that baseline is going to be higher than the status quo.
That's right. So the second is on the discretionary, and those are specific goals that the commission with the with the executive directive establish on an annual basis with AAG. So if there's a big movement to, let's say, one of the big issues that the mayor and the council identify is to increase the convention center for production, for movie production or TV production, and so there are specific goals that are being set. So the department would work with AG and establish goals around that. So those are discretionary in the standpoint. They're annual goals that are adopted, and they're both, AG understands what they are, the department understands what they are, and they reflect the priorities of that. We spend a lot of time talking about whether or not we should predetermine what those goals are now, and we decided not to because this is a very, industry that's constantly evolving and changing, and so instead the consensus was to allow for those goals to be set on an annual basis.
Now, when we took this up in June, your report indicated that there were anticipated savings in a variety of categories, and that there would be projections of increased revenues from TOT and sales tax and so forth. Do you have any updates now, given what we know in terms of the employee transition and other things? Have those projections changed? Have you been able to update that? What do you expect to?
It's premature. We know there's no new appropriation associated with this contract, so their target is to keep for this fiscal year to stay within the budget that was approved before we actually had a contract. So the budget that the department submitted is their revenue projections. It's their assumption of what the work entails, so we're making no changes. If there are any changes that need to be made, the first change will occur in the mid-year. In the mid-year report, just like every other department, we'll have to identify how our revenue is looking and how our expenditure is looking. And we're hoping that there's not a significant change, and if there is, it's a change for the better in terms of increased revenues. And then there's subsequent, at least one other FSR that will follow between the final one at the end of the. So we'll be monitoring that on a quarterly basis like we do every other department. The real bite at the apple will come when the new budget gets submitted. And keep in mind that this is a business where they know a year in advance, sometimes 2 years in advance, who's going to be actually filling the space. And AG will then work on those, marketing the venue for those opportunities that are within the year. And so, almost concurrent to us wrapping this up, the department's already meeting with AAG and my office to start establishing a budget for the following year. And then at that point, we'll have a greater sense of how much the revenue will go up, both for the facility, and it'll probably be in the second and third year that we'll know what it means for citywide, for hotels and sales tax and other things. And so, but as of today, because there's so much uncertainty, we've left everything the same.
In that you're going to be doing that analysis on a quarterly basis, I'd like to add to the recommendations an instruction that the CAO and the general manager report to this committee on a quarterly basis as well, regarding at least for the next 2 years, regarding implementation of the management agreement and its impacts on the convention center's finances and the city's budget as well.
Councilmember, may I recommend we could include it as part of the FSRs so that it's, unless you want it as a separate report, we could just, as we've done with other consolidations and changes, we've added that to the FSR.
I think that makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Now, the last thing is there's a reserve fund requirement, 10% reserve fund requirement. If we were to get to the point where that reserve fund were to be required to be used. I would want the council to be informed of that. And so what I'd like to ask is that we add to the recommendations in instruction that whenever it is anticipated that the reserve fund is going to be utilized, that this committee be informed of that ahead of time, and that the reserve fund not be utilized without prior council approval. That way, if we get to the point where we need to use that fund, we know that it might be a symptom of a much more significant problem that the council needs to be aware of. So, Mr. Overham, is that going to give you too much heartburn?
I don't know. I'm thinking about that as you say it. Prior approval is always a little bit scary if, and I guess we have in the mechanisms, let's say the chiller goes out, or the escalator goes out, or the elevator goes out. I can't come to you and say, the escalator's not working. We've got 20,000 people in the building. May I get money to fix the escalator? But I think we have provisions for those kind of contingencies. Look to my operating. So we have up to, okay, so they're saying I have up to 10%, if that would be okay with you, that I, within that administrative limit of 10%, and then come to you for anything in excess of that. That would.
But the reserve fund is the 10%, isn't it?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. That's my concern, is that if...
So so the intent here, if there's a shortfall due to, let's say, heaven forbid, we have another 9/11 and it's in Los Angeles. At that point in time, it may have an impact on even conventions and trade shows that are already scheduled within the calendar year. And so it's an episodic event that reduces anticipated revenues. And at that point, we have a citywide problem. It's not just unique to, we experienced that when the recession hit. The recession hit, there was a dramatic impact just across the city, and it happened. The convention center was no different that same fiscal year. So my office then, within that context, starts reporting to the council on what we're seeing, the impact that would occur. To the extent that we start anticipating that things are at that level where we may need to use the reserve fund, we will let you know. And obviously, to the extent that pre-approval or just, I guess what I'm trying to say is that with the exception of an event like that, that's sort of beyond our control, or an earthquake, should there be any shortfalls, we'll know early on. And so there shouldn't be too many surprises that if this time next year, today we should know whether they're on track to meeting their budget targets by the end of the fiscal year. And so as we, like every other department, when we start seeing a shortfall develop, we work with the department, and they will be working with the AG to start mitigating that shortfall. At that time, to the extent that we believe that it will be necessary or even remotely possible to dip into the reserve fund, then it is my office's responsibility to let this committee know. And that will be part of any action that's included in the FSR.
Okay. Well, I suppose we can make any necessary adjustments
Right.
once we're informed of that. We can adjust the budget. We can make revisions as need be. But because right now it provides that AEG is supposed to reimburse the city for any use of the reserve fund up to 30 days before the end of the fiscal year. So that might be a significant lag time, and I would want us to be immediately informed of that so that we can figure out what the problem is. If it's because a chiller blew or because there was an earthquake, obviously everybody's understanding of that. If it's because the budget just isn't working out the way we had hoped and we're dipping into the reserve fund, that's a whole different matter that's going to require council intervention.
No, and we would agree with that and report to your committee and the full council as soon as we become aware of it, and the vehicle is likely to be the FSRs.
Okay. Mr. Blumenfield.
Just so I'm understanding what the point you're making, how much is the reserve fund? It's 10% of what's total?
Of the entire AEG operating budget.
So what's that?
What is it today? I'm sorry? It's about 2.5 million today. Not the total, the 10% represents that.
The 10% is the 2.5 million.
Yeah,
But the 10% of the total AEG.
Well, it's not the total of what we're paying them to run the convention center, but the revenue that's being produced by the convention center. So,
That's where I was.
yeah, so
The total is 20 billion?
yes, it's several times more than that, obviously. So,
Yeah.
on an annual basis, as part of the base budget, the department will have to submit a base budget that includes a 10% reserve. And so, right now, because we're in the middle of the year, we're sort of working backwards. But today, that would represent 2.5 million, and the total budget is what?
It's around 25 million.
26 million. So next year, when their budget's submitted, we'll know what the total budget is for in terms of anticipated revenue as part of the budget. And when the department submits their budget, that assumes that revenue and the expenditures, part of it going to AEG, the biggest share, part of it going to manage the 13 members of his staff, then we'll also know what that reserve fund is in advance.
And the reserve fund is 10% of the total, not 10% of our expenses as a city.
Total percent of the total, yes.
So,
Of the revenue.
In other words, there's an operating budget that anticipates the entirety of the revenues of the convention center that's in the area of $26 million. We're not talking about AEG's fee here. This is the entire amount that comes in and is expended.
wouldn't like a contingency normally be proportional too? Like we'd pay our proportion of the contingency and they would have put up their proportion of the contingency? What? It sounds like we're putting up
Their
disproportionate contingency, but maybe I'm misreading this.
Well, this is again, that the budget process works is that this is the department's budget. The revenue projections that will be submitted in the budget will ultimately be those of the departments. They will be working with AAG. AAG will lay out a proposal that says we're expecting, $30 million in revenue next year. That it is the department's responsibility to examine that to determine how realistic it is or to challenge them to go higher. And so what we're proposing is that 10% of those revenue projections be put aside for a reserve in the event of things that we can't predict now. And so, but it's still at the end of the day the responsibility of the department to vet the revenue and to defend and to track those revenues. And so that responsibility doesn't go away.
Is anything in this going to increase our ability to utilize the potential for marketing revenue, like utilizing the roof, using signage opportunities, those sorts of things, or does that still require defeasing the bonds, regardless of the management?
There's signage related to the AAG deal itself on the stadium. The signage is, but there's nothing here.
But the stadium has nothing to do with this.
Right. So I'm looking.
Well, the sign package is comprehensive.
Right. John, you want to add?
Yeah, sign package.
Yeah, John Wickham with the CLA. There's already a series of signage agreements with AEG as a result of the Staples deal and other deals that have been made over the last 10 years or so. Those remain in place, and those are negotiations between the city and AEG, so AEG facilities would not be able to participate in those discussions with regard to the operation of the convention center. If Farmers Field moves forward, there's an entirely independent signage agreement,
right,
and that would take precedence over all the other agreements that are in place. And that includes signage on the top, the naming of the convention center on the top of the facility, for example, is already dealt with in other agreements in place now.
But that's only because if the Farmers Field agreement goes forward, we defease the bonds, right?
There was a different set of issues. I wouldn't want to jump in there on that one.
But I'm assuming
this doesn't
all of
touch
this
any
is
of that.
regardless of Farmers
That's
Field.
exactly
Assuming Farmers
regardless.
Field doesn't go forward, would we have any ability with a new private manager to be able to increase our revenues from utilizing, say, the roof of the convention center to put a big Coca-Cola?
There are certain restrictions in place as it regards to existing agreements with AEG resulting from Staples. And since those are not going away, we would have to deal with the constraints with regard to the Staples agreements. Okay?
Okay.
So, and that's between the city and AEG. The private operator is AEG Facilities, a subsidiary, wholly owned, you know. So it would not be with AEG Facilities, it would be with AEG, okay? Where those agreements and the rights and obligations exist. So we can put some signage on the facility in those agreements, but we have to work with AEG to negotiate what those terms are, and they're very different than what they were under the farmers agreement.
But to answer your specific question about this agreement has nothing to do with signage.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't change previous agreements we have with AAG regarding signage. There's no specific reference to the signage in this particular agreement.
Right. So regardless of whether there's a management contract or not, whatever those legal rights or lack thereof are, remain the same.
They
Yes,
remain with the city. We retained all of our intellectual property rights under this agreement.
Okay.
I think your assessment there was exactly right. Nothing changes with regard to existing signage rights or obligations of the city as a result of this agreement.
Okay.
All of that is controlled by another set of agreements that are unaffected by this.
I guess I was just told that under the other agreement, we agreed not to name the convention center or give naming rights for 25 years. But that's not under this agreement. That is under a previous agreement with
The Staples
Center.
agreement.
Right. So it's basically a non-compete issue as opposed to the fact that the convention center
Right.
was built with
We did not
bonds.
give up anything or give any rights away under the terms of this particular agreement.
Okay.
Yeah, there are a lot of details and nuances. There's the Staples agreement. There was a subsequent agreement that was negotiated regarding signage that still has to be implemented based on, some developments, AEG submitting applications to the planning department. There's a whole set of things, and all of that is still...
It's a bigger set of issues, all of which I want to get into, but none of it has anything to do with what we're voting on today.
Exactly.
So I'll just have to forego that for another day, I guess. Okay, final question on the recommendations in the CAO report. The first recommendation is to adopt the draft ordinance, but then it indicates subject to the changes listed in item 2. And then there's a series of changes recommended in item 2. I'm unclear whether those changes are or are not incorporated in the draft ordinance itself.
No, so the city attorney, when the first directive was given to strengthen to engage in this and the overall strategy, the city attorney drafted an ordinance which is before you. In pursuing this work and meeting with the city attorney and the rest of the team, we felt that there was additional amendments that would strengthen it even further. And so in order for the city attorney to make those amendments, they need to be directed by the council to do so. And so it is amending the draft ordinance that they've already prepared in light of the previous direction that was given back.
Okay, so how is that going to work procedurally if we advance this forward today to council? We need a revised ordinance. We're approving an ordinance, but we were going to be getting a revised ordinance, presumably,
as soon as
by the time of council?
Yes, you would be recommending approval of the ordinance subject to the changes set forth in the CIO's report. And that would
Right,
be,
but it's
I
not
think,
ordinance
A
language
through
that I have.
E in the CIO report, and E and F are actually two separate different ordinances.
So they will still come back to you separately.
Those ordinances have, E and F, the subjects of E and F have not been transmitted.
Okay.
The original ordinance that was requested by the council has been transmitted. That's the one that is before you. And what the CAO is asking is that that ordinance be, that you recommend approval or adoption of that ordinance subject to the following changes. And those are the changes set forth in item 2, A, B, C, and D.
So when this is heard in council, we will have
The
a
revised,
revised
amended,
ordinance
correct.
that's revised as specified in 2A through D.
Yes.
And then we'll have an additional ordinance that
For E
deals
and F.
with 2E and 2F.
That's correct.
And we
Two
don't even
additional
have a
ordinances.
draft of that at this point.
Well, at this point, you would not be actually recommending approval of those. What you're doing is really giving us an instruction to draft those ordinances and
Okay.
transmit those to you.
Okay, so would that separate ordinance have to come back here, or is that going to go straight to council?
It would
as well?
come here unless you chose to waive it through your committee, but it would ordinarily, we're been working on it. It's fairly straightforward ordinances, so we would be prepared to come back to you quickly.
Okay.
If you choose to waive it, it could go straight to the council. That would be
Okay.
up to you.
Okay, well, let's make that assessment once it's done.
Okay.
And then in the meantime, when we do go to council with the amended ordinance, with the amendments specified in 2A through D, it would be helpful if we had a red line version or something so that we can see how does that,
Certainly.
how are those changes made and what really are they.
Absolutely.
Okay. So I think I've already specified the two changes that I wanted to add to this. Members, are there anything further? Any other questions or recommendations? Okay. So Mr. Kretz has already indicated that he's going to be recorded as a no.
Correct.
Mr. Blumenfield, my recommendation is to approve the recommendations of the CAO report subject to the two changes that I added regarding quarterly reports in the FSR and informing the Budget Committee and the Council regarding use of the reserve fund.
I would move your recommendation.
Okay, so that will be the action of the committee with 2 votes in favor and 1 opposed.
And then for clarification, the city attorney has advised that on 5-member committees, you need 3 members to agree to move it forward with approval. So this will move forward to council, submitted without recommendation, but with those items
Okay, so it
identified.
would be on recommendation of the chair and a member.
Correct.
Okay, that's fine. All right, thank you all very much. Appreciate your time and good work on this.
That concludes the agenda.
And that concludes the work of the committee. We are adjourned.